Well, folks, we've come full circle. It's back to the days of MK Ultra. If as if we weren't medicated enough in this country, as if they weren't already using the pharmaceutical industry to control us, as if the vaccine debacle was not enough to teach you that. That was a lesson I learned. That was that was one of the few institutions in America that I wasn't like totally jaded and cynical about. I generally thought, hey, I think that the people who hate on the pharmaceutical companies, they might be a little overblown because, hey, they are making medicine that we need to survive. And, after the events of 2021 through 2023 became pretty obvious. It's like, oh no, they have no qualms about poisoning us. And so now I see this stock that is probably, it's definitely one of the biggest appreciating stocks of the day. It's up like 88% or something. I think it's called Megamind or something mindfulness. I forget. Mind medicine, maybe that was it. It's a pharma company that has just gotten approval from the FDA to do some trials using LSD to treat, get this, generalized anxiety disorder. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the whole psychiatric drug grift, generalized anxiety disorder is one of those things like whiplash that a doctor can just say you have. And there's no real way to disprove it. It is no, it's not like there's really any common set of symptoms. It's not like it's something that is particularly like debilitating or anything. It could just be like, oh, I'm uncomfortable at parties where I don't know any other people or something. And it's like, you have generalized anxiety disorder. And it's also become an identity group, which the CIA, getting back to MK Ultra, has promoted in the past. The CIA recently did a recruitment ad where they had this woman of color who was like frumpy, or I guess she would like to call herself curvy. I would say she's frumpy. And she was talking about how much she loved her gender studies major and how that led so naturally into a career as a CIA agent, and how she was proud that she was a woman of color with generalized anxiety disorder. And this was she was listing off all these things that make her who she is, and they were all labels and things. They were all these little labels, and one of them was generalized anxiety disorder. That's what she's a model CIA agent. And so it's one of these things like ADD. They can prescribe anyone with it pretty much if you just want to get the drugs. And so people get prescribed with actually I think they'll write you a script for crank even if or even for generalized anxiety disorder. So I think you can get Adderall out of that too. I wouldn't know because I've never been diagnosed with any of these silly made-up diseases. I've never been pumped full of all these psychiatric drugs, thankfully. My parents never did that to me. I knew other kids growing up in school, plenty of them, who were put on all these drugs, turned into zombies. And really, you can see the profile of the parents who do this sort of thing to their children. And I think also with the tranny stuff, the parents who go and take their sons to be castrated and their daughters to get double mastectomies and hysterectomies. These are the same sorts of parents who back in the day would have had their children lobotomized. And how do I know this? It's by listening to people who were lobotomized talk about their parents. In fact, there's a great interview with the last man in America to have been lobotomized that we know of, at least in like an official like medical setting. It's not. It wasn't like a back alley lobotomy. But although there's no reason to do back alley lobotomies, they were never outlawed somehow. And none of the doctors ever went to jail. Just in case you were wondering, oh, do doctors care about me and all this stuff. It's like, look up the history of lobotomies and realize that doctors are not your friend. They're deeply sick, twisted, evil people. And the medical community has never repented for the sin of lobotomy. But anyway, you listen to this guy, and he was talking about how he lived with his dad and his stepmom, and his stepmom didn't like him. She just thought that he was no good. Of course, he didn't get along with his stepmom because this is a natural thing. It's a natural thing to have friction between a step-parent and a child, because that is not a natural family structure. You're disincentivized to like each other because you have conflicting interests. As the stepmother, your incentive is to extract as much resources from your husband as possible, either for yourself or for your own children. And the stepson, meaning the biological son of your husband, is a competitor in that war for resources. And the same thing is true, of the son. The more that the husband gives away to his new wife, the less there will be for his own son or other children. But I believe this kid was an only child. And anyway, so one day while Daddy was at work, stepmommy decided to take little Timmy down to the strip mall lobotomy center, which happened to be run by the guy who invented the transorbital lobotomy. I forget his exact name. He was called the Ice Pick Doctor because he was an absolute barbaric butcher. And she brought this boy and he was the last guy, like by the early 70s. He was the only doctor in America who was still doing them, and he was one of the pioneers of it. But everyone else had given up on it and were like, I didn't used to do that, and they would kind of just not talk about it. He was very happily still doing them, and he cut this boy's brain out. And that's something that this guy's had to live with for the rest of his life. There's a part of him that was just destroyed, that he'll never get back. Like, he's still able to function. He is alive. He's lucid. He has a job, lives on his own or whatever. But it's just, they took out part of your brain. That is part of your consciousness, gone, ripped away. And these psychiatric drugs, even though they're not physically cutting out your brain anymore, they're intended to have the same effect. This is a form. This is psychiatric treatment. That's what lobotomies were. It was called psychosurgery. Now we have, I guess they would call it psychotherapy. It's a pharmaceutical therapy. It's not like interaction like you're talking to a therapist. No, you're being given these chemicals that are supposed to have a therapeutic effect on your mind. And that's what all these drugs are meant to do. They're trying to chemically lobotomize us. And it's one thing if you're an adult, and there are these crazy adults who are addicted, to amphetamines and whatnot. And I'm sure once this LSD thing catches on and inevitably, gets its approval, they will be addicted to LSD as well. They'll be just off in the clouds, going nuts. They inevitably become easier to control because these addicts go nuts when they can't get their fix. And so as long as you offer to give them their fix, they're going to be pretty obedient. It's pretty simple in the case of Adderall. Get all the younger generations addicted to Adderall, so that when they grow up eventually and replace all the old boomers or whatever, they'll become so addicted that the government just has to control the flow of Adderall, and they'll be able to control the entirety of the population, at least a significant portion of them, people who are dumb enough to get addicted to this stuff and not get clean. But LSD is a whole nother level. I know I've gone off on wild tangents because this is such a massive topic that I haven't even been able to talk about LSD, but LSD was brought to America and introduced into our culture by the CIA, specifically to be used as a form of mind control. And so now you have the regime using this pharmaceutical company to try and explore options of using LSD as a way of controlling supposed mental illness. But it's the most vague mental illness of all that you could prescribe to almost anybody. Now, I understand that there are people, obviously Joe Rogan talks about it endlessly, who like to use these psychedelic drugs and think that they are able to achieve some sort of higher level of enlightenment. And then you also have, religious people who say that, I've taken psychedelics and I can tell you that's absolutely a gateway, to communicating with hell. I'm not going to take a position on any of that. All I'm going to tell you is it clearly alters your mental state. We all agree on that. That is what they do. That is what psychedelic drugs do. They radically alter your mental state, alter your sense of reality. And I will tell you that I could not think of any more potent tool that the government could have to try and manipulate people's minds. That's not to say that they will do it well. Obviously, the CIA probably didn't run into an effective way to weaponize LSD back in the day. And that's why MK Ultra was, mostly experiments, and it didn't really, that part of MK Ultra, the LSD stuff, didn't really. There are other parts of MK Ultra that led to a whole lot of evil, but the LSD stuff, I think probably most people agree, kind of hit a dead end, and they weren't able to control it as well. If they weren't able to use LSD to make you, they couldn't control the trips. But that was 70 years ago. Perhaps there's been enough research now that they could do that. Either way, if I were, not that I'm the kind of person who would take psychedelic drugs, if I was going to, I would not want to take the psychedelics from the pharma bros. Because I think that if there is any kind of way for them to influence and control, which you would want to do. I mean, if you were going to make a commercial drug, you would want to be able to control the experience anyway. Rather than have everybody, have their own sort of weird acid trips. But anyway, if there was a way of controlling it, I would not want to be going on acid trips that were essentially planned and plotted out by the regime. It's just way too dangerous. I know that what I'm saying sounds kind of kooky. The government's going to manipulate your acid trips. It's like, well, I think that the reason why these drugs have been illegal for so long is because the government thought that they made people harder to control. That is the reason why every law is passed. Every law is passed to control people. And so they're not kind people. If the government is starting to loosen this stuff up, I'm not saying that, this is bad because more people are going to take LSD. I'm saying this is bad because it means they found some way to weaponize this against us. And I don't know how. We're going to have to see the data and see how it works out. But I have a feeling that this new pharmaceutical industry grade LSD is not going to be, it's not going to be what people are hoping for. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of bad trips. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.